Good morning, future crypto millionaires. Today, we're going to make hundreds, I tell you, as we do have a bit of a setup that is actually staring us in the face, probabilistically speaking, within the next 3 days, maybe maximum, add another 5 days on top of that. So three to 8 days. 3 to 8 days. Yes, if my math is properly done right there in my head. Anyways, other than that, in a more sincere tone, I do want to welcome you back to the Krown Crypto channel. It's a nice little Thursday morning, a very big day for Bitcoin, as it typically is, and a lot to talk about, actually. But before we get into it, I do want to say last night I watched Downfall, this movie about Hitler's maybe his last couple weeks to last month, for like the third time, and it's such an amazing movie. I just have to say it again. It's so damn fascinating. Like, seriously, if you're in any way, shape, or form interested in that period of history, watch it, because it is, from what I understand, actually pretty accurate in terms of what is said and in the mannerisms and everything. It's just amazing. Anyways, all right, sweet. Let's get off of that topic. Let's get into the actual topic of today. And first things first, because it is Thursday, I do want to remind myself that Thursday is, technically speaking, the most likely day for Bitcoin to close to the downside. As if we were to look to all Bitcoin closures on Thursdays, 39.5% of them have closed positively. So that is the lowest on the board here by a pretty damn good margin. And in the case that it has had negative returns, it's lost an average of 1.71%. And in the case that we have seen positive Thursdays, an average return of 2.3%. So I do just want to measure this up on the board here before we continue on into the fun stuff, to see kind of where this would align with. And about 2.30% to the upside would put Bitcoin around 43,750, and if Bitcoin were to play out a 171 move to the downside, that would put Bitcoin basically on a retest of the lows. Let's call it like 42,000 bucks even or so. Anyways, to now address the opening ceremonies of this video, I do want to go over to this chart right here. We're going to be focusing on the HPDRO indicator, which is essentially representative of directional volatility in an oscillator format. And what we see is that the daily time frame has gotten down to this very critical -80 read right here. Why is that relevant, you might be asking? Well, because we've only seen that so many times really in the past year. We've seen it actually 3 prior times in this past year. And if we were to look at actually really all of the times since September of 2021, and yes, we can go back further than that, but I think this is enough, and it fills up the whole damn screen here too. There's been 18 times within that time frame where we've seen a read of -80 or more. And the reason why this is relevant is because, as you can see, correlating with these green vertical bars on those low reads, those have been pretty nice bounce areas. In some cases, reversal areas as well. For Bitcoin to play out a short-term upside move. So what I've done is I've gone through the data and I've measured each and every time that we've seen that happen, and just looked at the first 5 to 10 days of that result and seen what has typically occurred. And so I'll run you through a few of these right here, and then I'll just give you the answer at the end. But basically, out of 18 of these prior reads, all 18, 16 did provide the impetus for at least a 5% bounce, and in many cases more as well. There was 2 times very specifically where it provided no bounce. There was no, pass, go, collect 200 bucks and go fuck yourself. It was just go fuck yourself, basically. One of them was this time right here in May of 2022. That low read was hit, and well, Bitcoin did actually, it did kind of find the lows on the next couple candles, but ultimately, if you would have bought exactly when we saw that first closure below -80 on the HPDRO, it would have been pretty painful. In fact, you wouldn't have gotten out in any sort of profit. And then, of course, the next one was actually a month later in June. May, June. Yeah. So it was about a month later. Same thing right here. It basically timed like the next portion of this Dumpola party. There was no smiles during that time if you were to be looking at this particular indicator. But for all of the other 16 times out of 18, it has provided the impetus for a bounce in the next 5 to 10 days of at minimum 5%, and in some cases as much as like a little bit over 10%. So in this case right here, this one actually I did measure out 11 days, but here's the thing about this one. It did produce about it produced about a 10% bounce from bottom to next high. If we were to just look at the next 5 days, it did produce actually just under 5%. But I wanted to elongate this one out because I thought that was like a little bit more important to be aware of. Anyways, another example right here, 5 days from the bounce, and well, actually this one's a little bit higher than what I have, but nearly a 10% move. This one over here was actually the biggest move out of all of these iterations. We won't go through all of them, by the way. I won't bore you with that. But in this case, this one was 30% within 5 days. And again, I'll go back all the way over here when Bitcoin was in, the process of a pretty nasty bear market in 2022. Even then, when we got these reads, within 5 days, sometimes, a little bit less than that, but the highest price within 5 days was still producing a bounce of, in this case, 675, 695, 889, 12%. That was within 2 days, by the way, as well. So very, very fast there. And then this one over here, 10 days, 8.79%. Again, if we were to look at just the next couple days, still over 5% right there. So all of them, again, around 5% or more within 5 days or less. Sorry, let me restate that. About 5% or more within 5 days or less, typically speaking. And in some cases, we've seen, some of those moves just continue onwards and upwards. I mean, we have a great example right here of one of those, but those were actually not par for the course. Most of them did just lead into overall sideways markets, actually. Especially in 2022 because it was a downside market. Anyways, in this case, we did see this particular area hit in Monday the 15th. So Monday the 15th, Bitcoin closed at 42,500. And so if we were to take that as a starting point and we're looking at, the next 5 days, that'd bring us into Saturday. So this would be relevant for today, tomorrow. Yeah. So the next 3 days basically. And if Bitcoin were to add about 5% on top of current, or sorry, not on top of current, but on top of that closure, that would put Bitcoin at around just under $45,000 actually. If Bitcoin were to go for the upper boundary of that within, that same sort of time frame, again, about 5 days, we'd be looking maybe closer to 10%, and that'd put Bitcoin at 46,500. So I do still remain with what I've been saying over this past now week, in the sense that Bitcoin more poised for a short-term bounce off this $41,000, $42,000 region. But the real question is, how high does this bounce get? If this bounce fails to get above 46,500 on a daily closing basis, I'm going to look at it as just that, a bounce before very likely some actual major sideways and downside, with mid and maybe low 30s, as like reasonable targets, maybe even lower than that if things get really, really crazy, probably on some sort of black swan type stuff. But my point is right here is that we're going to very likely get the answer to this next puzzle piece of the market, basically before the week's end, or before Sunday, basically. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that on last Saturday, when I put out that long video about Bitcoin's likely trajectory, kind of leading into these next like 2 to 3 months, basically into the halving, this is the next like big puzzle piece of that, because if that analysis is going to be incorrect, we would expect really like we'd really expect, based off of these statistics and probabilities here, that we'd probably see this one follow through like in less than a week, and I'd really say before Sunday anyways, is what that would suggest. So if you fail to see Bitcoin back above that number, that would be the next puzzle piece in that sort of long-term equation. But ultimately, coming off of this region right here, again, more likely to bounce than not. What I do think is very interesting, and what, if I did have to really make a bullish case about this, it would be this: volatility reads are still coming off of some of the lowest levels that we've seen for a long time ever, and they are expanding right here. The moving average is very obviously heading up, and we do see higher lows. So I am inclined to say that if that plays with an HPDRO upside signal, which it will get pretty soon here within the next day, extremely likely, that could theoretically have the rocket fuel to kind of reclaim that that very critical region at 46,500. So it is possible, yes. Is it probable? I still think that it's unlikely actually. But somewhere around $45,000, give or take a little bit from that number, I do think is very, very likely here within these next few days, before next week basically, and then we get to play the game of where do things close. So While things are more or less boring, especially for this past week, important things do happen as usual. Anyways, moving on now, I do want to add on to this case overall in the sense that the 12-hour time frame for CME is printing some hidden bullish evidence here, suggesting that short-term upside bounce is likely from these regions. There's not necessarily an intended target from that, but it does just, suggest that, hey, we have another thing kind of pointing in the same direction. And the 12-hour jewel is getting pretty damn down there and is now turned white. So it's suggested that the short-term downside move is over. We already kind of knew that, but likely a bit of a mean reversion bounce here nonetheless. And speaking of mean reversion, we can go back to our chart with the HPDR bands, and we can see that Bitcoin has actually been closing well below the 50% of range lows for 1, 2, 3 days now, actually between the 61.8 and the 786 right here, and that is going to come alongside again these signals kind of popping up. So if Bitcoin were to bounce back up, let's say to the bottom side of the 50% of historic returns range low, that'd put Bitcoin at 44.6 just for reference. So these things do still kind of line up with each other. We're just seeing multiple different views kind of, I guess, what's the word that I'm looking for, having confluence. The median, however, is still quite high at 46,900. So I suspect that that'll come down in the next couple of days, probably to 45,000 or 46,000. And I don't really have much to add on to it other than that. But again, just another thing that does suggest that, probabilistically speaking, Bitcoin more poised for a bounce here. Bounce, not the same thing as fucking reversal. As we went over many a time, which I hope to make as abundantly clear as possible, just because I've already gotten a few questions about this, and it's like, okay, but are you now saying that there's not going to be any downside? It's like, look, there's no way to know anything for sure anyways. It's all probabilities is what it is, just likely. But what does it likely look like? I still think that it's likely going to look like this. You bounce up or maybe not that high, but bounce maybe somewhere around there. If you see rejection, okay, come back down, base one more time, maybe another shitty bounce, and then break down in like early February. Or let's say Bitcoin does reclaim 46,000 bucks. Okay, then all of that is going to be invalidated, and you can probably just expect a pretty ripping move above 50,000 bucks and probably beyond from there, honestly. But these things take time, of course, and well, a little bit of patience goes a long way, I suspect, as well, and that's probably a good place for me to be leaving off on this particular video. So yeah, we'll leave it off right there. What would invalidate a short-term bounce? So that's actually a better question, which I've not addressed just yet. And what would invalidate a short-term bounce would essentially just be a closure below Monday's low, which is 41,700. Daily closure below there, and get ready for Bitcoin's probably first attempt below 40,000 bucks. Again, I don't think that happens before a bounce, but that would be the criteria that I'd be looking at to invalidate that, as is always needed. All right, that's going to do it for today. As always, I want to wish you the best of the best. I forgot to humbly request that if you do find this content valuable, please do consider liking and subscribing. We do these videos each and every morning, and maybe even a live stream tomorrow morning as well. If things do move, that would be really cool. That'd be super cool. We can do a live stream on Friday, but if it's still kind of like this, then no. All right, I'll end it right there. Take care. Much love. See you hopefully tomorrow.